private. And I think all of us who know him really have to respect that we should do the same. But I will say, of course, it's been hard and sad, especially for all of.
The whisper started behind closed doors in the West Wing, but by midnight, the letters patent were already being redrawn. William and Catherine did not release a standard press statement. They let a single, devastating sentence slip during an unannounced briefing at Kensington Palace. Queen Camilla's royal style had been quietly severed. Not by decree of the king, but through an unprecedented constitutional maneuver executed while Charles was out of the country. A late-night call that changed everything. A single sheet of thick parchment sat on the desk in the West Wing, bearing 3 words that palace aides had never seen together in print. At 9 on a Thursday evening, senior reporters received a sudden summons to Kensington Palace. No advance notice went out to the newsrooms, and aides offered no preliminary context over the phone. Staff directed journalists straight into a ground-floor reception room, bypassing the usual press office completely. Prince William and Catherine walked into the room without an entourage, bringing no press secretaries or media advisors with them. William carried a slim leather folder, which he laid flat on the wooden table at the front of the room. He did not sit down, nor did the Princess of Wales, as he looked straight at the row of cameras. He spoke for less than 90 seconds, reading directly from a signed administrative decree that stated plainly that the style and title of Queen Consort was under formal review, effective immediately. He noted that operational authority over household titles had shifted directly to the estates of the Duchy of Cornwall. He closed the folder with a sharp snap and did not take a single question from the floor. Catherine stood beside him, silent, her arms folded across her front. They turned together and walked back through the double doors leading toward their private apartments, while the room erupted into chaos before the doors even closed. Correspondents shouted questions toward the empty hallway as phones rang across every news desk in London. This was not a standard royal announcement, but an administrative execution executed with cold precision. Behind that short statement lay 72 hours of silent, ruthless maneuvers carried out behind closed doors. The entire operation happened while King Charles was isolated at Balmoral, far away from the capital. For months, tension had been building behind the scenes, despite the polite smiles at official engagements. Inside the palace corridors, a very different reality was unfolding behind the royal facade. It began with a subtle shift in household budgets across multiple departments. Money usually allocated for the Queen's private office started facing unexpected administrative delays while vouchers went missing, and expense reports sat on desks for weeks without approval. Then came the physical shifts of assets and historical items across properties. Furniture from the Queen's suite at Buckingham Palace was logged for inventory checks and moved to storage in Windsor. Nobody raised an alarm because the movements looked like routine maintenance work. It was not maintenance, but a systematic isolation of her operational power carried out under the radar. William had been tracking household expenditures since 2024 with meticulous care. As heir to the throne, he gained complete control over the duchy assets when his father became king. That gave him immense financial leverage over household operations, leverage he was now fully prepared to use to enforce order. Catherine played an equally active role in the strategy, managing the internal communication strategy with cold precision, while ensuring key allies within the household staff stayed quiet as the paperwork was prepared. By Wednesday morning, the legal groundwork was complete, and the lawyers had finished drafting the administrative overrides. All that remained was delivering the news to the person it affected most in the entire household. That delivery did not happen over a phone call or through official correspondence. It happened face-to-face, behind closed doors, in a meeting that was never recorded on the official court circular. The sharp conversation nobody was supposed to overhear. Before the press briefing was typed, Catherine walked through the side entrance of Clarence's house carrying a heavy black folder. She skipped the main lobby entirely, choosing a discreet route through the service corridors. A trusted security officer guided her up the rear staircase directly to the private morning room. Queen Camilla was sitting at her writing desk, looking over personal correspondence, when the door opened without warning. She did not expect visitors at that hour, let alone senior family members with legal documents. Catherine set the black folder down on the polished mahogany table between them, without offering a formal greeting. She simply opened the cover and pressed the top page down with her hand. The document was a formal notice that outlined a complete restructuring of household styles, funding lines, and staff allocations. Voices rose almost immediately as the reality of the situation set in. A former household footman standing near the landing reported hearing sharp exchanges through the heavy oak door. Camilla's voice sounded incredulous, demanding to know who had authorized the draft. Catherine's response was flat and steady as she explained that the authority sat directly within the revised governance clauses of the royal estate. Camilla reached for the landline telephone on her desk to place a direct call to the King's private secretary in Scotland. The line did not connect, as the call was redirected to a holding desk at Kensington Palace. William had already locked down the direct communication channels between Clarence House and the Northern Estates. Every call out of the building had to pass through the central exchange, which was temporarily managed by his own team. Camilla stood up from her desk, her face pale with anger, accusing the Princess of Wales of orchestrating a constitutional coup while the king was recovering from his treatments. Catherine did not argue back, but simply pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the second page. It did not bear the king's signature, but a seal from the Duchy Council, executed under an emergency governance clause dating back to 1917. Standing quietly near the high-arched window throughout the entire 20-minute exchange was a third person who did not speak a word. He held a silver pen and a second set of ledger books under his arm, waiting patiently for the conversation to end. Camilla demanded to know who he was and why he was standing in her private quarters without permission. Catherine gave a brief answer before turning toward the door, telling her that his presence was legally required to witness the service of the notice. Camilla refused to sign the paper and pushed the folder off the edge of the table, scattering the pages across the carpet. Catherine did not bend down to pick them up, walking out of the room and leaving the door slightly open behind her. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, Camilla was heard shouting for her personal secretary to prep a car for an immediate trip to the airport. She wanted to be on a plane to Aberdeen within the hour to see her husband directly. The car never arrived. Garage staff had received direct orders 45 minutes earlier. No vehicles leave the courtyard without explicit clearance from the master of the household. The trap had closed completely, with every line of escape blocked by administrative procedure. Camilla was trapped in her own home, stripped of her operational staff, while her stepson prepared to go live on national television. She tried using a private mobile phone to reach her son, Tom Parker Bowles, but that effort offered no relief. That call went through, but there was little he could do from the outside, while the palace walls had effectively gone dark to her entire personal network. Inside Clarence House, staff began moving with unusual speed as the operational takeover took hold. Servants quietly cleared out papers from the outer office desks without asking questions.
Personal assistants were told their security passes needed immediate digital revalidation at the gatehouse. When they stepped outside to validate their cards, they were not allowed back into the building because their access had been revoked.
By 3 p.m, Camilla was virtually alone in the residence, accompanied only by 2 long serving maids who refused to leave her side. At 6 o'clock that same evening, senior partner Sir Geoffrey Voss unlocked a floor-to-ceiling iron safe inside the private estate offices at Lincoln's Inn Fields. He removed a thick bound volume tied with faded blue ribbon, resting it on a long oak desk. 4 legal advisors sat around the table, their laptops powered down and their personal phones locked in a wooden box outside the room. They spent the next 3 hours combing through original parchment pages written under King George V. They were hunting for one exact phrase buried deep inside the statutory archives. The room stayed quiet while pages turned softly under task lamps. One lawyer raised his hand, pointing a pen at an obscure footnote on page 42. The text outlined the administrative relationship between the financial assets of the duchy and the public titles tied to the royal house. It specifically addressed what happens when a royal consort's household funding relies entirely on estate revenues controlled by an heir apparent. The clause gave the custodian of those funds full authority to freeze operational budgets if administrative accounts showed unresolved accounting variances. Without dedicated estate funding, an official title loses its legal backing under statutory house regulations. William's legal team had discovered that the title of Queen Consort was not self-sustaining under British constitutional law. It required an active grant of financial maintenance issued by the controller of the land assets. By withholding that maintenance grant, the Duchy Council could effectively reduce the title to a purely honorary style with no official standing. The legal team drafted a 3-page instrument that activated this dormant clause immediately. The silence from the north during these crucial hours was not accidental. King Charles was staying at the Craigwan Lodge estate, resting between medical treatments with a reduced staff. His private secretary had been advised that routine administrative updates would be handled by the Central Coordination Desk in London to keep the King's schedule light. By the time the estate filing went through the High Court registry, the window for an executive veto had already closed. Back in the capital, a senior clerk at the Chancery Division noticed an unusual emergency entry on the private sealed docket just after 4 in the afternoon. The entry referenced an administrative adjustment to royal household accounts, but carried a high-level security block. The clerk attempted to flag the entry for routine administrative review, but his computer screen immediately locked up. 2 officials from the Home Department instructed him to log out and hand over his key card. He collected his coat and left the building through a side door on Carey Street, leaving the sealed records in the hands of the state attorneys. By 7 in the evening, the legal paperwork was securely transferred back to Kensington Palace. William held the signed court order in his hands, confirming that the operational funding for the Queen Consort's office was officially suspended. Inside Clarence House, Camilla attempted to compose a personal letter to the Prime Minister, hoping to bypass the palace blockades and seek governmental intervention. She wrote 3 pages by hand, but when she handed the envelope to her chief bodyguard to be dispatched to Downing Street, he politely declined to deliver it. His orders required all official correspondence to pass through the Central Palace Clearinghouse first. Realizing that even her security detail was following the instructions of the Estate Council, Camilla stopped writing. She retired to her private sitting room, keeping the window blinds drawn tight against the waiting press corps outside. In less than 12 hours, a carefully coordinated legal strike had dismantled years of household infrastructure without a single public debate. The emergency docket remained sealed under double locks, and the countdown to the official press briefing had begun, finding the loophole left behind in the letters patent. At 7 o'clock on Thursday morning, a legal courier delivered a sealed leather briefcase to the private estate office at St. James's Palace. Inside were 3 original copies of the statutory land grant documents from 1948. Senior attorney David McIntyre spread the parchment sheets across a wide conference table. He pointed his finger at a single paragraph near the bottom of the second page. The clause outlined the exact financial mechanisms supporting household styles. It stated that all administrative funding for a consort's office depended on quarterly approval from the estate treasury. If the treasury withheld certification, the official household staff had to be disbanded within 30 days. This legal distinction changed everything. A royal title is not just a social form of address. Under British administrative law, an official title requires dedicated state funding, an active private office, and explicit inclusion on the official court circular. Without the estate treasury's signature, the legal framework supporting the title simply ceases to function. William's legal team realized they did not need a parliamentary vote to alter the household structure. They only needed to block the quarterly funding allocation from the duchy accounts. The strategy was executed with extreme administrative precision. On Tuesday morning, the Duchy Council formally declined to certify the upcoming quarter's operational budget for Clarence House. When the news reached the private secretaries in the capital, panic spread through the household departments. The accounting team realized that salaries for personal aides, press officers, and domestic staff could not be processed for the upcoming month. While the financial block took effect, a second operational move was unfolding inside the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle. Archive clerks were instructed to pull the official registry ledgers dating back to 2022. They were looking for the original registration entry that recorded the formal style of Queen Consort following the accession. A junior archivist noticed a missing seal on the lower margin of the enrollment page. The missing seal was an administrative oversight from the chaotic days immediately following the late Queen's passing. At the time, household staff rushed the paperwork through without completing the secondary verification process required by the College of Arms. That small technical flaw gave William's legal team the leverage they needed. They filed a formal administrative stay, arguing that the title had never been fully perfected under statutory house rules. The silence from the King's office in Scotland continued to puzzle household insiders. King Charles remained at the Birkhall residence, surrounded by a small team of personal aides who kept his daily schedule strictly focused on health recovery. His private secretary was receiving daily administrative summaries, but the legal filings regarding the duchy accounts were marked as internal estate matters. Under standard operating protocol, routine estate management decisions do not require immediate royal sign-off. By the time the king's personal legal counsel realized the full scope of the filings, the administrative stay had already been logged in the High Court records. The legal strike was complete, executed entirely through procedural maneuvers and financial controls. Back in London, staff members were forced to adapt to the new reality immediately. At 11 in the morning, administrative officers began clearing out the private press suite at Clarence House. Desks were wiped clean, computer monitors were disconnected, and official stationery bearing the Queen Consort's crest was packed into gray plastic bins for destruction. A delivery van from the central stationery office pulled into the rear loading bay at noon. Workers unloaded 40 boxes of fresh paper stock, each sheet printed with the updated household headers. The new headers removed all references to the consort's office, replacing them with standard administrative designations. Outside the palace gates, tourists took photographs near the main archway, completely unaware of the operational overhaul happening inside. The changing of the guard proceeded precisely on schedule at 11:30. Behind the stone facades, however, the digital infrastructure of the monarchy was being systematically rewired. Software engineers were already logging into the central servers to prepare for the final data update. An emergency docket was opened at the High Court of Justice, registered under a private seal that prevented public access to the case files. The docket contained the formal administrative order confirming the suspension of household funding. The judge signed the order in chambers without holding a public hearing, citing internal Crown governance exemptions. With the legal paperwork finalized and the court order secured, the stage was set for the digital records to be altered permanently. Only one final hurdle remained before the public announcement could go live. A lone IT manager sitting in a basement office at Windsor held the master access codes to the primary royal database, and he was refusing to run the update without a direct written order. Staff taking sides while the doors remain locked. At 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, 2 senior stewards walked into the main kitchen at Buckingham Palace and posted a printed notice on the staff bulletin board. The paper listed 9 names belonging to Camilla's personal domestic team, instructing them to hand in their security passes by noon. Downstairs in the basement communications room, 4 press officers sat at their desks with their computer monitors turned off. Their internal network logins had been disabled at midnight. A security supervisor stood near the door, holding a clipboard with a list of updated clearance levels issued by the Duchy of Cornwall Estate Office. Staff members quickly realized that working for the Queen Consort was now a professional liability. Household employees who had served the royal family for decades began quietly aligning themselves with William's administrative team. Younger aides hired after 2023 found themselves completely isolated, unable to access basic scheduling software or internal phone directories. The division showed up immediately in daily operations. At 10 in the morning, the domestic staff refused to prepare the standard midday tea service for Clarence House without a signed voucher from the central accounting desk. The voucher was requested, but the estate office declined to authorize the expense. For the first time in decades, the trays remained untouched on the kitchen counters. Catherine stepped into the operational vacuum at 2 in the afternoon, arriving at the Kensington Palace Administrative Building for an emergency meeting with household heads. She brought no security team inside the conference room, sitting at the head of the long table with a blue notebook open in front of her. She reviewed every line item in the household budget, crossing out allocations meant for Camilla's public engagements. She replaced those line items with funding for upcoming regional tours planned for the Prince and Princess of Wales. The message to the department heads was clear. Official resources were officially moving toward the future reign. While the meeting was underway, a quiet conflict broke out inside the Royal Archives Department at Windsor Castle. A senior archivist received a phone call from an unknown number, telling him to remove 3 sets of ceremonial guest books from the public display cases. The books contained official signatures from international state visits conducted during the spring of 2024. The archivist refused to move the ledgers without a formal work order, signed by the master of the household. 10 minutes later, 2 security guards arrived at his office door, with a written suspension notice and an escort out of the castle grounds. His deputy stepped in immediately and carried out the order, placing the historic ledgers into heavy steel storage boxes. Outside the palace walls, the public knew nothing about the internal purge happening behind closed doors. Tour buses pulled up along the mall, dropping off hundreds of visitors who lined up to watch the household cavalry. The outer appearance of stability was maintained with absolute precision by the palace guard teams. Inside the private apartments, however, the isolation of Clarence House was nearly complete. Electricians working for the estate office arrived at 3 in the afternoon to rewire the private communications hub. They disconnected the direct landline that connected the residence to the official government switchboard at Whitehall. Camilla's personal secretary attempted to leave the building through the garden gate to meet with a legal advisor on Victoria Street. The gate guard informed him that his security pass had been downgraded to visitor status, meaning he could leave the premises but would not be allowed to return. He chose to stay inside, retreating to his ground floor office. By 5 o'clock, every personal assistant, communications advisor, and administrative secretary assigned to the Queen Consort had been effectively neutralized. Their phones were silent, their email accounts were locked, and their access to the royal court circular was revoked. The institutional machinery supporting her title had been completely dismantled in less than 9 hours. Across the courtyard, a delivery truck carrying updated promotional materials pulled out of the loading bay and headed toward the central distribution center in Middlesex. The boxes inside contained thousands of official booklets printed for upcoming public ceremonies. Every single booklet had been replaced with a revised version that omitted the Queen Consort's name and official heraldic shield. As evening approached, the focus shifted from physical isolation to digital removal. A team of system engineers assembled in a secure office at St. James's Palace, waiting for the final legal signal to clear. They held master administrative keys capable of altering the royal family's public digital footprint across every official platform in a matter of seconds. The senior engineer opened a master terminal script and typed in the primary access code, pausing with his finger over the enter key. He was waiting for a single confirmation text from Kensington Palace to confirm that the High Court order had been officially entered into the public registry. The text arrived at 6:45, containing just 2 words: "Execute now." Rewriting royal history on a server in Windsor. At 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, lead MIT contractor Mark Thorne sat inside the subterranean communications hub beneath the Norman Tower at Windsor Castle. He stared at a blinking green cursor on a black terminal screen, refusing to touch his keyboard. Beside him lay an encrypted flash drive sent directly by courier from the private secretary at Kensington Palace. His team manager had given him a clear, direct order: execute the database script immediately and purge the Queen Consort's official protocol entries from the Central Crown domain. Thorne hesitated because running that script violated long-standing operating procedures established in 2021. Royal Digital Archives strictly required a signed authorization code from the sovereign's personal private secretary before any global database modifications could be pushed live to the public. He picked up his desk landline and dialed Balmoral Castle to verify the order. The line rang 6 times before an automated message cut in. Incoming communications to the private apartments were suspended for evening maintenance. A junior technician standing near the server racks pointed to a real-time monitoring screen mounted on the wall. The public-facing website was already experiencing artificial latency, introduced by network engineers working out of a secure facility in St. John's Wood. The network team was intentionally throttling external web traffic to prevent news organizations from scraping cached pages while the central database was being modified. If Thorne did not execute the script within 20 minutes, the automated system backup would lock the database files for the next 12 hours. At 7:20, the heavy security door to the hub opened, and an officer from the Metropolitan Police Protection Command walked in, holding a sealed manila envelope. He handed the envelope to Thorne without saying a word, standing silently by the door. Inside was a signed administrative order from the Duchy of Cornwall Estate Council, invoking an emergency data governance clause created during the pandemic back in 2020. The clause allowed the heir apparent to modify public-facing digital assets during periods of administrative household transitions. Thorne scanned the signature line at the bottom of the page, recognizing the sharp, distinct seal of the Duchy Council. He realized that the legal authority had already been shifted away from the traditional palace private secretaries. He plugged the flash drive into his terminal port and typed in his high-level administrative master password. The automated script executed instantly, scanning through more than 14,000 individual database records spanning official biographies, press release archives, and public engagement schedules dating back several years. Within 3 minutes, every instance of the Queen Consort's official title was removed from the primary database cluster. The software replaced those entries with her pre-accession designation, effectively erasing her formal style from official Crown records across the world. The script moved line by line through the core file architecture, updating biographical entries, photo metadata tags, and royal calendar archives without throwing a single system error. The transformation was total, absolute, and executed with cold digital efficiency. While the primary server in Windsor finished its processing cycle, a secondary script began sweeping through external third-party indexing services across the country. Digital archivists working out of a secondary data node in Bristol monitored the automated removal of cached images and metadata records. By 8 o'clock, search engine algorithms were already updating their global knowledge panels to reflect the modified database entries. The digital removal of her royal title was complete, accomplished without a single line of public code leaking to the newsrooms beforehand. Down inside the basement office, Thorne ejected the flash drive and placed it inside a heavy metal safe mounted to the concrete wall. He logged off his workstation terminal and handed his physical security access badge to the police officer standing beside him. His long-standing contract with the royal household was terminated on the spot, accompanied by a standard non-disclosure agreement that carried severe financial penalties for any breach. He packed his personal desk items into a small cardboard box and was escorted out through the security gates near Thames Street. He walked out into the cold night air, leaving behind a digital footprint that had been completely rewritten in less than an hour. Across the estate, server lights flickered quietly in dark rooms, serving updated web pages to millions of unsuspecting users around the globe. The official records now told a completely different story, one where the title of Queen Consort simply did not exist within the current household structure. The digital trail had been wiped clean, leaving no trace of the previous protocols on the public network. With the digital infrastructure completely updated, only one major barrier remained before the entire operation became irreversible under constitutional law. The formal physical records held inside the private office of the Lord Chamberlain still contained the original hard copy decrees signed during the coronation year. These paper rolls were stored in fireproof vaults, serving as the ultimate legal proof of royal titles and heraldic styles, until those physical rolls were officially amended or superseded by a registered court order. The digital changes remained legally vulnerable to a counter-directive. At 9 in the evening, a black sedan pulled up to the rear entrance of St. James's Palace, carrying a senior legal clerk from the Chancery Division. He carried a heavy leather briefcase containing the final set of administrative override orders ready to be stamped into the official court record before the morning news cycle began. The clerk stepped out of the vehicle and walked briskly past the armed guard stationed at the side door, holding his clearance papers out for inspection. He made his way up the narrow stone staircase leading to the archive vaults, where 2 estate attorneys were already waiting for him beside an open steel safe. They laid out the physical parchment rolls on a long felt-covered table, opening the ink jars and preparing the formal seals. The physical history of the household was about to be altered to match the digital servers, closing the final legal loophole in a 72-hour masterclass of institutional control. A father torn between his wife and the future of the crown. At 10 o'clock on Thursday night, a red dispatch box arrived by royal courier at Birkhall, the king's private residence on the Balmoral estate. King Charles opened the leather lid himself, using his personal key. Inside lay the finalized administrative stay documents, already stamped with the seal of the Chancery Division. Beside the legal paperwork sat a short, handwritten note from his eldest son. The note contained no emotional arguments, simply outlining the financial frozen accounts and the legal precedent from 1948. It laid out the cold reality. The institutional machinery supporting the Queen Consort's official style had been turned off. The sovereign faced an impossible choice in the quiet Scottish Highlands. Under traditional crown protocol, he could issue an immediate royal prerogative decree to override the estate council. Doing so, however, would trigger an open public clash with the heir apparent and the managers of the Duchy of Cornwall. Furthermore, a public battle would draw immediate attention to the accounting irregularities flagged during the 2024 financial audits. The king sat at his wooden desk until past midnight, reviewing the statutory limits of his executive authority. His private phone rang at 12:30 in the morning. The caller was his longtime personal advisor, Lord Edward Young, calling from a secure line in London. Young confirmed that every major national news outlet had already received the embargoed press release from Kensington Palace. The media machinery was primed to run the story at dawn. Overriding the order now would not stop the news from breaking. It would only transform a coordinated administrative transition into an unprecedented constitutional disaster. The king asked his advisor a single question about whether the prime minister had been briefed on the filings. Young confirmed that Downing Street had received a formal notification at 6 that evening. The government chose to treat the entire matter as an internal household governance issue, refusing to intervene. With no political support and his household funding locked, the sovereign's options were exhausted. He closed the red dispatch box and placed his personal key back into his pocket. The institutional isolation of the monarch was complete, engineered entirely through legal paperwork and financial leverage. At 7 the next morning, the official statement went live across international newswires, confirming the permanent removal of the royal style. Yet, as the public digested the shocking headlines, palace watchers noticed a curious detail buried in the final paragraph of the press release. A new advisory committee was being formed to oversee the allocation of royal titles for the upcoming decade. The mystery was why the committee's charter explicitly exempted members of the immediate bloodline, while placing strict conditions on non-lineage spouses. The answer became clear by noon. The legal mechanism used against Camilla was not designed as a single, isolated strike. It was a permanent constitutional firewall built to protect the crown's assets for generations to come. As the afternoon sun hit the stone walls of Kensington Palace, William and Catherine stepped out into the courtyard for a scheduled public appearance, completely unfazed by the storm raging in the press. The quiet shift in power inside the British monarchy is now complete, leaving the royal family permanently altered. William and Catherine have proven that the future of the institution will be dictated on their terms, using cold legal strategy and financial leverage to reshape the sovereign image long before the next coronation takes place.